Good morning. It's an honor to be with you today. Dr. King used to say, to be free, you must overcome the love of wealth and the fear of death. And I appreciate Hunter for introducing me this morning. I appreciate his love of this country and service and sacrifice in uniform with the Screaming Eagles. And I'm very grateful for my dear friend Kelly McCutcheon, who chairs our board with Henry and has made so much of what we've done possible. And I look forward to sharing a little bit about that with you this morning. I'm going to talk a little bit about where we were as a state when I moved here, where we are now, and what I hope we can become. One of the aspects of my background that was really a great deal of fun, I had the privilege and opportunity of having a real estate business in Russia for 12 years. The Russian people have been through over 1,000 years of slavery and servitude. They had these really wise and insightful parables. They're very indicative about their culture. It's a very dangerous place. The scriptures tell us you will know the truth and the truth will set you free. Russia was a place where you couldn't talk about the truth. And I hope we can have an honest conversation this morning. But they would hint at it through these brilliant parables they had about life. And one of my favorites is about the Russian people being on a train. And the train stops and Stalin's in charge. And he says, shoot everybody responsible and we'll get the train moving again. And he does with utter terror. And then the train stops a second time, and Khrushchev is in charge. And he says, free everybody that Stalin put into the gulag, and we'll get the train going again. And they do. The train stops a third time, and Brezhnev is in charge. And he says, pull down the shades and pretend we're moving. I moved back to Georgia 10 years ago. This is my home. So as I say some honest or make some honest observations, please understand it's from a person that loves this state, loves the people in this state, and is very excited about the future. But I think it's to move forward, you have to have the courage to pull down the shades and honestly evaluate where you are and roll up your sleeves and fix the challenges and obstacles that you're confronting to move forward. I moved back to Georgia in the summer of 2004 and I'd started Henry in California knowing that I wanted to move to Georgia. Henry, as Hunter mentioned, is the Healthcare Institute for National Renewal and Innovation. Our focus is solving big problems with leading innovators in health. That came from working with Sequoia. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Sequoia. It's a big venture firm on the West Coast. You may have seen the movie Jobs. Mark Merkla from Sequoia invested in Google. In fact, they have created over $1 trillion of market cap. And Don Ballantyne at Sequoia said, we have one investment criteria, only one. We want to solve big problems. If we're solving the biggest problems, and we want to invest in big things that are going to change the world, the internet, personal computing, mobile apps, et cetera, and we're going to work with the brightest minds in the world to do that. So the one investment criteria is it must be big. I was fortunate enough to be a senior fellow with Newt Gingrich's Center for Health Transformation. And he asked the question of Jim Clifton, how many innovators drive the U.S. economy? And the answer they came back with, rightly or wrongly, was 3,000, which is interesting. The greatest economy and economic engine, I would argue, in the history of the world, and only 3,000 people are driving that engine. And I wonder sometimes if we're trying to shoot them, quite frankly, with what we're doing with our government. But think about Georgia, think about Atlanta. What would our city, what would our state look like if I told you I was going to take just 4 people away when they're 20 years old and move them somewhere else? I'm going to take away Robert Woodruff, founder of Coca-Cola, Martin Luther King Jr., who led this nation in the civil rights movement, Ted Turner, the founder of CNN, and Bernie Marcus, the founder of Home Depot. And I'm going to move each of them somewhere else when they're 20 years old. What does our state look like at that point? What do we look like? I think we'd look an awful lot like a third world country. So if you can see in the rearview mirror that that's how important an innovator is, what are we doing to identify, recruit, attract, and retain, and empower the next generation of innovators? And that's what we created Henry to do. I believe Georgia is uniquely positioned to be the leader in global health. No one else has the CDC. Not even Bill Gates, with his vast wealth, can replicate the $6+ billion the CDC is doing in research every year with over 5,000 MDs and PhDs. We are number one in health IT. We're number two in fintech. We're number one in global payments. We're number two in media and entertainment. We created the cable news industry. We have more fiber running into our city than any city in America. We are a national leader in logistics. So we've got these incredible assets. We spent over $500 million through the Georgia Research Alliance in trying to drive innovation in our university system. But we also have some of the greatest challenges. When I moved back to Georgia, Governor Perdue appointed me to the State Health Board in January of 2005. I began serving in February. At that time, our budget was $13.2 billion, and we had not produced a financial statement in 2.5 years. We were number one in the nation, the percentage of our population that was under correctional control. We were second in childhood obesity. We had the third highest high school dropout rate in America. Atlanta was the fourth most congested city. It had gone from 30th to 61st in business-friendly cities. We have 159 counties. 57 of them didn't have a doctor. 67 didn't have a primary care physician. 88 of those counties led the nation. We as a state led the nation in TB, in the incidence of TB and AIDS. 88 of our counties had third world healthcare demographics. We were in the bottom 5 in mortality from almost every chronic disease. We led in mortality from cancer deaths. We were leading the nation in sex trafficking. That's where we were as a state. Our state health benefit plan in DCH, the Department of Community Health, was the third largest in America, 660,000 people. 25% of that population had diabetes, 43% was obese, 62% had one or more chronic diseases. We were leading. We were leading in being last. And if we are going to be relevant as a state, we have to have bold, innovative leadership. We have wonderful people in our state. Alexander the Great used to say, "I can defeat an army of lions if they are led by sheep." You're the future. Many of you have seen Chris Kyle, the movie maybe American Sniper. If you have, perhaps you remember the scene at the breakfast table where his father says there are 3 kinds of people in the world. They're sheep, they're wolves, and they're sheepdogs. And none of us want to be any of those, but if we have to choose the attributes, I hope our political leaders will choose to protect, preserve, and defend the heritage and the legacy of faith, freedom, and virtue that has made us the envy of the world. It is our free enterprise. It is the free enterprise system is the single most powerful engine to bring people out of poverty that has existed in the history of mankind. We are the beacon of hope and liberty and opportunity for the world. But if we're every generation before us has realized that we are one step away from tyranny. I was talking to Kyle before we opened this morning, and we were talking about millennials, and they have tremendous compassion, but they're incredibly uninformed. Our founding fathers told us over and over again that an uninformed and ignorant citizenry would never be free. And so we have an awesome responsibility to maintain that freedom and liberty for future generations by making the sacrifices of our forebears for our children and theirs. So, well, let me tell you quickly, so that's where we were. That sort of was the problem statement. With Henry, we wanted to identify problems and solve those problems with innovators. So we do that in one of four ways. We identify the problem, we either partner with a Georgia innovator, recruit an innovator to Georgia, start an organization, or create a coalition to solve problems. The first problem we wanted to go after in health was 1.7 million Georgia uninsured, and we started an organization to do that. The second was 1 out of 88 children born on the autistic spectrum. We partnered with a Georgia innovator to address that issue. The third was 58 attempted suicides among military men and women, veterans in this country. 22 a day were successful. A divorce rate of 68% for one deployment, 81 for two, 93% for three or more deployments. The fourth was, and in that case we created a coalition. The fourth was sexual slavery and ending trafficking. There are 27 million slaves, 7 million of them sex slaves, more at any time in human history. We recruited an innovator to Georgia. And we are also doing clean water, vaccines, antivirals, feeding starving children, and creating access in clinics and partners across Africa. And I'll talk to you a little bit about that. But before I do, Bill Gates said the biggest challenge in health, and our objective is global health equity. And we want Georgia to be the national and international leader in global health innovation. Bill Gates said the two biggest challenges in global health are a lack of innovation and a lack of access to the solutions that innovation creates. So one of the reasons we started with the clinic network was to create access. So we started with an organization, or restarted an organization that had 5 clinics serving 6 counties with about 15,000 people a year with less than $10,000 in the budget. We raised $600,000 for them for free. So what we do is, once we identify an innovator or problem, we define what the solution looks like. The solution in that case, we wanted to provide charitable care to 1 million Georgians a year in every county and save $1 billion a year. That was our objective, and still is. So there were all kinds of policies that needed to change. It was illegal then in Georgia for a retired physician to provide free care to a homeless, indigent, and uninsured person without medical malpractice insurance. So we got that law changed. We said, sue us, sue the state. Let this retired doctor provide care charitably. We got pharma donated masks, medical supplies donated masks, a technology platform. Last year, our partner, we have 105 clinic partners serving 130 Georgia counties that provided charitable care to 325,000 homeless, indigent, uninsured Georgians and saved our state $420 million. We have a partner now. Our budget's been $150,000 a year. We host an annual conference at Georgia Tech every year to identify best practices, gaps in care, et cetera. We have a partner now that's going to, looks like, fund $2 million a year, and I'm confident we'll meet our objective of serving 1 million, saving $1 billion in every county in the next 24 months. That was our first project. Our second was autism, 1 out of 88 children born on the autistic spectrum. There's no insurance for that. We partnered with a Georgia innovator in Roswell, Amy Odell, and we helped her raise $2 million to create a campus in Roswell. She had been innovating in her basement. She's one of the most powerful innovators I've ever seen. I brought in billionaires and centimillionaires from Silicon Valley. the West Coast, set up 35 to 40 meetings for them a week. And I love to say, what did you enjoy most this week? And one after another of them said, and they met chairman and CEO of our biggest companies, billionaires, our political leadership. Almost without fail, they would say, the most impressive person I met was Amy Odell. We have now worked with the school with over 1,000 families on 5 continents. We are launching a digital platform in 40 states. They'll be available to 20,000 teachers and over 200 school districts that are working with special needs children. We're in negotiations and discussions with Harvard Medical School about opening a $10 million center in Switzerland with the Swiss government to create an international center on innovation and autism. Our third project was the military, and Kelly called a meeting with Senator Isaacson. We did and our political, business, philanthropic leadership, and we made the commitment for Georgia to be the #1 state in America for programs and services to the military. The military is critical in driving innovation in healthcare. That's where general surgery, penicillin, antibiotics, and blood transfusions came from military innovations. We have the largest warrior transition unit in the nation, in Augusta, the largest spinal cord injury unit. If you expanded Georgia's boundaries by 500 miles in every direction, almost 30% of the force that served in Iraq and Afghanistan over the last decade lives in that footprint. We have 11 military bases that had a $21.3 billion impact on our economy last year. The military is a huge part of who we are as a state, and we need to give back to those men and women who have sacrificed so much to protect our freedom and liberty around the world. It's not a political issue. So we did a survey of over 4,400 military families with 2 or more deployments and asked them what they wanted and needed. They said, we want a safe environment to decompress from the stress of combat and re-engage with our family before we try to re-enter society. So we partnered with Bo Calloway, the 11th Secretary of the Army, his son Edward, at Callaway Gardens in Warm Springs, which was the site of the 1996 Paralympics Training Center. And we started doing retreats to prevent suicide. We've now worked with over 1,500 military families. We do 6 to 10 of those a year. Then we have races to fund those with Scott Rigsby, the first double amputee to do the Ironman. Augusta has the largest half Ironman in the world. And with Jackson Healthcare, we created a database that will track all the for-profit, nonprofit, and government resources in our state, and are creating a call center so veterans can serve their other veterans in that call center and let them know what resources are available based on best practices. And there's a very unique, and then we realized the real need was vocational programs for particularly people with disabilities to help them get to that first rung of the ladder. So we partnered with Warm Springs, which falls into the Section 110 federal matching program, which you get up to an 80% reimbursement for training and a 1-to-1 match on buildings and infrastructure to train people with disabilities, military or non-military. And we realized that Georgia gets $130 million a year out of that program, but we were returning $30 million to other states that was unmatched. So I went to Governor Deal in November 2012. I was chairing the board of visitors at Georgia Regents University, now Augusta University. I said, Governor, let us take over the hospital. We know how to run a hospital. It's under the Department of Labor right now. You're losing $5.3 million a year. We've got a $1.1 billion balance sheet. Let us take over that hospital and free that $5.3 million up for the matching program. He agreed, we did. As a result, the legislature gave us the golf course at Warm Springs. We don't care about golf, we care about veterans. But it gave us an opportunity to create a golf vocational program that we're working on with the USPGA that Jack Nicholas and Tom Cousins helped us launch in November of 2012. But there's an incredible opportunity for our state because the Obama administration passed Section 503, an amendment to the Americans with Disabilities Act that mandated that 7% of your workforce must be disabled if you have a certain amount of revenue from federal contracts. What that means is companies like Landscapes Unlimited, who we met at Augusta National, who does their upkeep. They have a 5-year, $85 million contract with Augusta National. We invited them to Warm Springs. On a Wednesday, they got contacted by the federal government on a Tuesday. They said, you fall under Section 503. You have 12 months for 7% of your workforce to be disabled, or you will lose all your federal contracts. They said, what on earth are we going to do? The next day, they see the solution at Warm Springs. They said, we'll hire everybody you can train. One company after another is falling under that mandate. Oakley, it's a huge contractor of the military for their sunglasses. They have to manufacture in the United States or they'll lose that contract. And now we can say to them, well, you can do it in Kansas City, Missouri, or Lincoln, Nebraska, or wherever you want, and pay 100% for your training and 100% for your buildings and infrastructure, or you can partner with us at Warm Springs and pay 20% on your training and 50% on your infrastructure. What would you like to do? So it's a huge opportunity for economic development for our state. On trafficking, we partnered with an innovator, a young man whose mother was beaten and raped in the ghetto. His father had already left him in Spanish Harlem. He went on full scholarship to Dartmouth, full scholarship to Penn, full scholarship Penn JD. He had a Sequoia-backed company that was sold to YouTube called Great Americans, was on the front lines in the Bush administration on the Defense of Marriage Act. He has established 6 centers around the world. We're working with the British royal family in Parliament, the head Sikh in the House of Lords, the head Jewish rabbi, many imams in Great Britain, on combating radical Islam and terrorism in Europe. We are partnered with the South Korean Supreme Court and Diplomatic Corps on human rights abuses in North Korea and China based on communism. We recruited him to Georgia 4 years ago, received a unanimous vote from the Martin Luther King Advisory Council to launch kingrights.org. We did a national documentary, which Andrew Young is chairing. We did a national documentary and created a curriculum around it that will launch in every 10th grade classroom in the state of Georgia this year on the role of faith in civil rights. I don't know if you realize this, but we are losing our freedom of speech, association, and assembly. We are eradicating the First Amendment, dramatically eradicating it. So my pastor in New York met with our president, and he said to him, Mr. President, I'm a Christian, that's my identity. And I understand you want to protect the identity and freedom of people who disagree with me on their lifestyle from an LGBT standpoint, but don't you think under the Constitution that I have the same freedom of speech, association, assembly that they should have? And he said to him, absolutely not. It is the policy of this administration that their rights trump yours. And whenever there is a conflict, that is the policy of this government, that their rights trump yours. If we do not wake up and stand for our heritage and legacy, we will lose it. But we're trying to educate the next generation on the truth of the civil rights movement, that it was men and women of conscience and faith. Women's suffrage, the Underground Railroad, our healthcare system. We at least want to create cognitive dissonance to teach our history as it occurred. And I want to put those people in the position of calling Andrew Young a racist. And that's what needs to happen, and that's what we're doing. I'm not going to accuse anyone of bigotry or discrimination or anything else. I want the truth of our history to be taught in our school system. If we cannot stand up and teach the truth, we are condemning ourselves to a generation that is going to live in darkness. So we are focused on the issue of ending trafficking. The UN, and we have a wonderful opportunity there. I've been working with the Cathy family on a health innovation campus. But part of that, I believe we need to create a center that's focused on national, internationally, on ending trafficking. We lead the nation in that issue. We're working right now on an event in LA with Bono, Sting, Aerosmith, Slash, whoever that is, Justin Bieber, Timberlake, called Set Them Free. We're releasing a series of albums to educate the next generation about that issue. I mean, there are villages in India where there are no girls in one village after another from age 4 to 14 because the parents can't afford the dowry. They've all been sold into sexual trafficking. We were called by the Obama administration, and we were partnered with the Joint Chiefs of Staff on our military programs. We were approached 3 years ago by the Obama administration. I went up for a series of meetings with 3 or 4 cabinet secretaries focused on how do we end trafficking. We're going to do 3 pilots at the White House, Las Vegas, Nevada, the city where the Super Bowl is, and the state of Georgia. Because we are leading the nation. And that's what created our educational programs. And we're in negotiations with the Board of Regents to create a media and academic center on civil and human rights to end trafficking with 4 of our universities. We are going to be hosting Rotary International in 2017. In 1905, Rotary started. In 1915, the Rotary Foundation started out of the Atlanta chapter of Rotary. They've almost eradicated polio, and they want to move to a focus on sex trafficking. In 2016, from June 4th through 10th, we are hosting the world of Rotary, and we hope to make that transition an announcement. We're trying to invite Bono now to help lead a concert for that effort. But I believe we need to commit ourselves as a state to establishing a national and international center to end trafficking, and we're working on that now. But more importantly, we need a campus for health innovation. As I talked a little bit about the CDC, they have no technology transfer or intellectual property strategy. U.S. billionaires, because of the Buffett-Gates challenge, are going to give away $600 billion in the next generation. $200 billion of that is going to go to health care. If you had a son or daughter and they said to you, I want to be a country musician, I think you'd encourage them to look at Nashville. I want to be a high-tech entrepreneur. You'd say, well, you need to think about Silicon Valley. I want to be an actor and actress. You'd encourage them to at least consider LA. I want to be a derivatives trader and work in financial services. Well, you should look at Wall Street. When that conversation is had and a young man or woman says, I want to change the world in healthcare, I want the obvious answer to be, you need to move to Atlanta, Georgia. We have the March of Dimes came out of our state at Warm Springs. We've almost eradicated polio, but we have eradicated smallpox. The person who did that is a Georgian, Bill Foege. He was the director of the CDC in the Carter administration. He was the first director of the Carter Center, and he convinced Bill and Melinda Gates to get into healthcare. I was at an event with him earlier this week. Bill and Melinda were honoring him and his 30 years of service through the Task Force on Global Health, which eradicated smallpox, the only time that's ever happened in human history. We need to create a center where we attract innovators like the next generation of innovators. Habitat for Humanity came obviously out of Georgia. The Civil Rights Movement, the largest brand in the world within an arm's reach of desire. But we need to create a technology, and I'm meeting with the chairman of the Science and Technology Committee for the House to create a technology transfer strategy for the CDC. As I said, over $6 billion a year spent in research. Let the royalties and license agreement flow back into the CDC Foundation, which does things like provide clean water during Katrina in the Superdome or bulletproof vest elsewhere. But that is an incredible engine. That's more than 5,000 MDs and PhDs. That's larger than the entire state university system in the state of California. We need to harness that opportunity for innovation and global health and go after that $200 billion. Look at all we did to recruit Baxter to where I'm from, Morgan County. Look at what we did to bring the Starbucks League factory to Augusta. Look at what we did to recruit Kia. And we celebrated those successes, and rightly so. But what is our strategy for that $200 billion? We need to have a vision. I have tried 3 times to innovate centimillionaires and billionaires to Georgia that would change our economy, and dramatically impact how chronic disease is addressed in this country and mortality and morbidity around the world. The first was Bob Langer, a multi-billionaire. I tried for 2.5 years to recruit him unsuccessfully in what became the largest regenerative medicine company in the world. Then Bob Bozeman, who did 422 angel deals in 5 years. He and his partners were the first investors in Google, PayPal, Ask Jeeves, OpenTable, Red Envelope, Twitter, LinkedIn, Groupon, and Facebook. He offered to bring in a $200 million venture fund if Georgians put up 50. He came here almost every other week for 2.5 years. Crickets. Crickets. No interest. With Mir Imran, I tried to recruit the first angel investor in Google. His companies and inventions have over $300 billion in sales. I hosted him 3 days a month for 10 months. We were competing against 4 other U.S. cities and 4 other countries. Singapore has just made a commitment to Mir for $100 million, $10 million a year for 10 years. We had no interest in Georgia. I introduced him to over 500 billionaires, our political leaders, our university leadership, and our CEOs. 4 university presidents went and spent 2 days with him in Silicon Valley. I'm bringing him back again. Mir would not only, and the Board of Regents did commit $75 million for him to create an innovator. He would do 20 to 25 companies over a decade. That would be nice. But what's transformative is he would mentor 60 to 80 entrepreneurs who themselves would start 200 to 300 businesses. That's why HCA has 62% of the hospital services market in Nashville. They don't have the resources we have. What they do have is HCA, which has spun out over 220 companies. It's great to bring in industry, but you've got to bring in innovators. Those are the people that are going to change the world. There's a wonderful example. I was on the phone yesterday with Brett Hagler. The American Red Cross in corporations, 1 out of 100 great ideas sees the light of day. 1 out of 10 of those is funded, and 1 out of 10 of those succeed. Big organizations, big bureaucratic organizations, governments, corporations, they don't know how to innovate. They cannot find their rear end with both hands when it comes to innovation. I mean, they just can't. They're there to protect themselves and cover their backs. They're rare exceptions. I was on the phone yesterday with Brett Hagler, who created New Charity Story. The American Red Cross made a huge commitment to build houses in Haiti. And I'm not trying to slam the Red Cross, but do you know how many houses they built in Haiti in the last 5 years after raising millions of dollars? 6. 6. Brett Hagler started New Charity Story on June 1st, 2015. In 3 months, he built 142 houses for less than $750,000. Where do you want to spend your money? Who do we want to partner with? 85% of our economy is small business. We need to create 92% of our venture capital is coming from out of state. We are not going to be relevant as a state. We're not going to be relevant as a city. We're not going to be relevant as a community if we do not partner with innovators and create an environment where they can thrive. 15 years ago, and I won't name her name, there was a chairman of both, who was a centimillionaire, the Board of Regents, the first, and the Metro Atlanta Chamber. And a friend of mine who was an innovator in Georgia, who helped create the Georgia Bio, Georgia Cancer Coalition, and Georgia Research Alliance, asked her, I'm a young entrepreneur, what advice do you have for me? What's been the most critical aspect of your success? You're a centimillionaire, you've been chairman of the Board of Regents in Georgia, chairman of the Metro Chamber. What is the number one thing you've done to be successful in your career? Her answer was shocking and tragic. She could have said anything. My faith, a third grade school teacher, my family. She said, I determined at the beginning of my career that I would never do business in Georgia because as a carryover from the civil rights, it's a place where they want to press you down. And it's a control-oriented environment. They'd rather, than a rising tide lifts all boats, they'd rather push you down to feel better about who you are. So I decided I would never do business in this state and only use the airport. That has been the secret to my success. Is that who we want to be? I know it's not who we are. But if we're going to become a leader, we've got to be willing. When I was in 1992, when I was applying to business school, I read an article in Time magazine where they interviewed over 100 people that were 90 years old or older. And they said to them, with your lifetime experience, if you had your life to live over, what would you do differently? And the consensus was three things. We would risk more, we would reflect more, and we would leave more that would be here behind us when we're gone. Risk, reflection, and legacy. Georgia was the last state in the country to allow our pensions to do alternative investments. When I went through that journey of 6 to 10 years, one thing I heard over and over again from the legislative leaders, number one, what does the governor think? But number two, it won't cost us anything to do nothing. Okay? The statistics I just quoted when I moved back to Georgia, that is the price of doing nothing. And if we want to be relevant for our children and grandchildren, we must demand better of our political leadership. Not mediocrity, but excellence. Our state seal is wisdom, justice, and moderation. I'm not sure about the first two, but we have got the third one down cold. And if we want to be relevant, we need to be wisdom, justice, and innovation. And you're the future. You're the future. It's in your hands. Gandhi used to say, be the change you want to see in the world. I bring these things up not to complain, but to say there is great work to be done, and we need you as the next generation to put your hands to the plow. I'm a bald, fat guy in a wheelchair. You know, but what we're doing is simply collaborating with innovators to change the world. You can have a much greater impact than I could ever dream if that's what you decide to do, to invest in our community. I want to tell you two quick stories, and then I'll answer any questions if we have time for that. The first is Etta Mae Budd. He's a real hero of mine. I don't know if anybody's heard of Etta Mae Budd. But about over 100 years ago, she was in the cafeteria at the University of Ohio, and there was a black man eating in the kitchen named George. He was a teenager. And she befriended George across racial and gender lines, which was quite a scandal at that day and age, with tragically where we were in our society at that time with discrimination. But she got to know George, and she said, come eat with me in the main cafeteria. And he had these sketchbooks. She said, George, do you want to be an artist? He was drawing these plants. He said, no, I want to do research in agriculture, but I don't think because of my race and economic situation I can get the education to pursue my dreams. And she said, let me talk to my father, who happened to be the president of the University of Ohio. And as a result of her befriending George and having that conversation, George Washington Carver got his education. There was a little 6-year-old named Henry who George befriended, who would go do research, who was a young white man, young white boy. And he developed, and he mentored him and took him to take samples of his corn and wheat for his research. And as a result of that, that little boy, Henry, developed a lifelong passion for agriculture. That was Henry Wallace. He became Secretary of Agriculture and Vice President of the United States. As a result of his passion for agriculture, he went to the Rockefeller Foundation. We were very concerned about overpopulation and starvation as a result. And he identified a scientist named Norman Borlaug, and he approached the Rockefeller Foundation and said, we need to fund a research center in Mexico City to create rust-resistant and weather-resistant corn and wheat, and got Norman Borlaug's research funded. Norman Borlaug won the 1970 Nobel Peace Prize, the Presidential Medal of Freedom, and the Congressional Gold Medal. There are only 6 people in our history who've done that. He was credited with saving the lives of over 1 billion people when he won the Nobel Prize. But the point of the story is, Norman Borlaug never would have saved the lives of 1 billion people if Henry Wallace had not gotten his research funded. And Henry Wallace never would have been interested in agriculture if he hadn't been mentored by George Washington Carver, who would have never received his education if a young woman had not reached out across socioeconomic, demographic, racial, political lines and befriended a black man who had a passion, a vision, and a dream. You may not be Norman Borlaug, you may not be Henry Wallace, but you can certainly, and you may not be George Washington Carver, but every single one of us can be Etta Mae Budd. I'll close with this story. I went to the North Avenue Trade School, and I was student body president. And I was sitting in my office preparing a speech for the incoming freshmen. And I remember when I was an incoming freshman, the student body president said to me, "Look to your left, look to your right, one of you won't be here in 4 years." That was very optimistic because most of us were going to take 5 to 7 and the dropout rate was 50% for engineers. But I was sitting there praying about what am I going to say in this speech. And I got a knock on my door in the office in the student services building from a friend from high school. And he said, "Let's go." And I said, "Where are we going?" He said, "We're going to Pan for Gold." And I thought, and he was a student at the Medical College of Georgia. He just finished his exams. No phone call. He just showed up. And I said, "Oh, okay." So we go outside. He's got his picks and shovels in the back and medical journals in the middle seat. And we went to Crystal. And sure enough, he's got a map of Georgia with all the gold deposit up in North Georgia where we're going to go Pan for Gold. So we hop in his car and we tear off on headed to North Georgia, to Dahlonega. And he sees a woman who's trying to hitchhike, and he slams on his brakes and pulls over dramatically to pick her up, and I went, "Oh no." The last time he had picked up a hitchhiker, it was at 3:30 in the morning in Washington. He was headed to see a friend of ours in Massachusetts. And he came back outside, and there were these 2 women in his car that turned out to be men that forced him to take them to Connecticut at gunpoint. So, I mean, I was not excited about picking up hitchhikers with him. And I think this was a woman, I'm not sure, but she had burns all over her arms and her cancer. She had lit up some kind of, I don't know if it was crack or what. I mean, I'm hanging out the car. I never smelled anything so bad. And she'd just gotten fired from the Waffle House. Her name was Lynn Jordan. And I have never in my life, I've been a missionary in Latin America and Poland during the Solidarity Movement, and Russia and Africa, which is what got me in healthcare as Hunter's Year. And I've never felt so compelled to share the gospel with anyone in my life. And I said, "Lynn, I just want you to know that God loves you. And I believe Jesus Christ was pierced for your transgressions, bruised for your iniquities, and by his stripes you're healed. And I believe if you accept the free gift of his payment for your sins on the cross, that you can spend eternity with him. But I want you to know that your Father in heaven loves you, and he wants a relationship with you." And we took her to Long John Silver's and bought her a 6-piece fish dinner and dropped her off at the China Star Motel in Lawrenceville and drove up. And some woman who was unfortunate enough to have a creek running through her yard, we dug up, we're by the creek in a thunderstorm and her, panning for gold. And Judson, my friend, acted like he struck it rich. He had a bunch of fool's gold, and we all laughed. And we were doing the jawbreaker, dinosauric jawbreakers. We can't even speak. Doing this. So we get back to Atlanta, and we're laughing, and we're nasty in the thunderstorm, and we, shag carpet, rabbit ear TV, whatever. And we pop on the TV. We sit on the $20 couch from the Salvation Army. You guys all remember those college days, I'm sure. And the first story on the news We didn't turn the channel or anything, just popped it on. There's a reporter with a fire in the background. And they said, there's been a fire at this China Star Motel. 4 people have been injured and 1 person died. And it was Lynn Jordan. It was the hitchhiker we'd picked up 5.5 hours before. And I shared that story with the freshmen. And I said, you know, when I was in your seat, they told me look to your left, look to your right. One of you wouldn't be here. One of you won't be here in 4 years. Let me tell you something different. Look to your left, look to your right. It does not matter if you're student body president, homecoming queen, you graduate with a 4.0 or a 2.0, you fail out of Georgia Tech, don't graduate from college at all. The only thing that matters is the person to your left and the person to your right. They are an eternal child of the living God. And the impact that you have in their lives while you're here is the only thing that matters while you're a student at Georgia Tech. So I would say to you as an Atlantan and a citizen of Georgia, let's pray and ask God what He would have us do to serve the person to our left and the person to our right and build a better community, a better future, and a better legacy and heritage for those who come behind us. God bless you.